Hello, everyone. Thank you for standing by and welcome to the webinar, Fast Track to Law 25 Compliance. My name is Heather Vaughn, your host for today's session. In today's session, we will discuss the provisions of Law 25 that will go into effect on September 22nd, 2023. During the webinar, we will have a panel of experts who will provide relevant and timely information about a solution to help many of the underlying issues associated with personal information stewardship. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available for on-demand viewing. During the presentation, you will be in listen-only mode. We will make time at the end of the presentation for Q&A to address any questions you submit during or after the presentation. You can submit your questions by entering your question into the Q&A box in the top left-hand corner of your screen. There is also a Q&A widget located at the bottom of your screen. The slides are available for download from the attachments widget, and we also have a few great resources there, so make sure to take a look and download the attachments. We are pleased to offer this webinar to you, and on that note, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Robert Eckersley, Director, Channel and Partner Sales. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Heather. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, Fast Track to Law 25 Compliance. Our Law 25 compliance solution is the product of two vendors with leading technology joining forces. Our solution is elegant and comprehensive, and we're very excited to share it with you today. My name is Robert Eckersley. I'm responsible for vendor alliances at Denodo, and I will be monitoring our session today. I'm joined by some very accomplished presenters from both Denodo and our partner, Data Sentinel. First, I'd like to introduce Mark Rowan. Mark is well known in the Canadian data management and privacy area as the former president and CEO of Steam Integration, which Mark sold to Prolifics. Mark's currently the co-founder and CEO of Data Sentinel, specializing in the automation of data privacy compliance and sensitive data management. Mark is a great guy. He's hardworking, knowledgeable, and dedicated to customer success, and I'm glad to have him with us today. Also from Data Sentinel, I'd like to introduce Michael Roberts. Mike is the VP of Consulting Services for Data Sentinel. He has a leading role in implementing their proven process for data assessment and automated data classification. Mike has 30 years of deep experience in the Canadian data management space with Newcomp Analytics, Stream Integration, and Prolifics before joining Data Sentinel. Finally, Etienne Pelletier is Denodo's Solution Director for Montreal. Etienne is, I think, Denodo Canada's secret weapon. He's a technologist who's very adept at explaining the benefits of technology in relatable terms. Prior to Denodo, Etienne had a long run at IBM, where he was their global head of smart energy software. So welcome to all our presenters. You're going to find as we go through today, we'll be switching back and forth quite a bit as different people bring their perspectives. Our agenda for today is here. We're first going to talk a little bit about the why, the why we're here today, why Law 25 compliance is going to be critical for organizations. We're then going to detail what those Law 25 requirements are and ask a few questions along the way of you. So be prepared to answer a few polls. We're going to then detail our solution and then give you a live demonstration showing one of the many scenarios in which we can aid Law 25 compliance. We'll summarize with next steps, and we'll have some good time for questions at the end. So please type them in, and we'll address them, or wait to the end and do that. But don't be shy about questions as we go ahead. So let's talk a little bit about why we're here. So in many ways, GDPR is kind of the guideline for what's happening here. That went into effect in Europe, I think in 2017. And Law 25 in Quebec and the provisions for C27 that we expect to have hit the rest of Canada soon are in large part based on the framework that was put in place by GDPR. And it was very interesting to see how companies progressed on their journey towards GDPR compliance in Europe. Many companies were a bit slow at first, were not prepared at the deadline. But it turned out the regulation really had teeth. And a lot of the work, Denodo did a lot of work and made a lot of sales around GDPR, but a lot of that work was actually after the deadline. And what happened was that, well, the regulators started fining people. And it's been very interesting to look at the progression of those fines. I did some research before we put together this seminar today. And here's some information I got from a GDPR blog. There's been a lot of notable GDPR violations and large scale fines. And they've been growing as the years have gone on. So there's been more than 50 of over 500,000 euros. The largest was just set very recently this year when the US company Meta was charged 1.2 billion euros of violating GDPR laws. They were transferring data out of the EU to the US. There's been a lot of notable ones from companies of all different types. You can see ones here by British Airways, Marriott, Vodafone, all of which have been fined for not protecting their customers' data. And what I found is as time goes on, the fines are getting larger. So there's both fines and obviously reputational risk of not looking after and safeguarding customer information. But beyond that, there's a personal element to this. And I'd like to hand things over to my colleague, Etienne, to discuss that.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, I just wanted to share with the audience here that achieving regulatory compliance is really a mean to an end. We do this because it's the right thing to do. And the personal story here, it's my mom. My mother called me a month ago in panic. She's been victim of a fraud, basically. And you can imagine what she had to go through, right? So we do this to achieve compliance. Yes, of course. But really, the main reason why we have to do this is because there's a human reason behind this. And this makes our work, so my work, but everybody in this call's work, even more important because we're there to make people safe. So I just wanted to share that personal perspective to give a flavor to what we're presenting today. Back to you, Robert.
Thanks, Etienne. Well, it's so important to understand that the law is there for a reason. And the reason is that protecting personal information in a digital age is vital. So the next thing we'd like to do, I'd like to pass things over to Mark Rowan, and Mark is going to take us through some of the provisions of the law itself. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Robert. We'll dive into a little bit about Law 25, but before I do that, a little bit of a commercial for C27 and what we foresee coming out at a national level within the Canadian marketplace. Someone could correct me, but last time I checked, C27 was in committee, which ultimately means it's moving down the line fairly rapidly to becoming law. Nobody really knows exactly what will be in C27 when it does come out, but we're anticipating it's going to be somewhat similar to Law 25 in Quebec, GDPR in the European market, CCPA within the Californian marketplace. The laws around the world tend to be somewhat similar. Data privacy laws I'm talking about specifically. And Law 25 is not all that unique when you start to look at the various different laws, country by country, region by region around the world. And they're in place to protect the information assets that are provided by individuals to entities or organizations, companies, governments, etc. And the basic philosophy behind that is that the individual, the consumer, owns their data. And they're providing that data to an organization or an entity with specific permissions and rights that they're going to maintain when they do that. So the organization that's going to take that data has to have consent from the individual under these laws to use that data specifically for the purpose with which they collected it or what they told the consumer they're going to collect it for. And that kind of consent is an important facet of the law. And it does change how we manage our businesses and deal with individuals. Because at the end of the day, the individual owns the data and they have a right to govern the use of that data within the organizations that have been granted the right to be able to maintain that and use it for a business purpose. And of course, then there's the consequences of not complying with these various different laws. And there are a number of them. Obviously, there's fines embedded in these laws. So the laws have teeth. And as Robert was saying earlier, we've begun to see a significant pattern of regulators enforcing the laws. And we would anticipate that that will be the case here in Canada. But the other consequences that we need to be concerned about are things like litigation. And we've seen that evolving around the world, around the concept of mass torts. And we've obviously seen that in Canada a few years ago with a particular incident that occurred in our marketplace. So it's not unseen in the Canadian market that these types of things can occur. And the third risk is really around reputational damage. If your customers know, or it's in the press, that you've had an incident and that you didn't comply with the law, obviously that can have a negative impact on your organization. Diving in a little bit deeper, let's talk a little bit about organizations have to comply. So last September 2022, the first phase of the law was enacted, and the number one element of that was that you had to put in place a privacy officer. If you have not put in a privacy officer and nominated that individual, then by default it becomes the CEO's responsibility. So de facto, if you're doing business with people or residents within the Quebec marketplace under Law 25, your CEO is the privacy officer unless someone else has been designated as such within the organization. The other facet of last September is the responsibility to report data incidences. When I use the word incident, what I'm really saying is data breach. It has such a negative connotation associated with it, so the industry starts to use things like the word incident to describe a potential breach situation. Moving into September 2023, right around the corner, is really the meat of Law 25 and the elements of Law 25 that are going to be significant pieces of change for organizations. From fairly simple things like implementing a privacy policy and ensuring all your customers or the people you do business with understand your privacy policy, so publishing it, keeping it up to date, is a fairly simple task. But when you start to get into things like putting in place a privacy program overall for an organization, along with governance, that complete program is quite significant an undertaking. You're getting into things like policies and rules around how you manage and govern data around the organization. What data do you need to anonymize? What data can be freely moving around the organization? How do you classify those data assets? How do you look at things like data that's in unstructured form and structured form across all the various different types of may hold this information in? It's quite a significant undertaking that incorporates the people, the processes, and technologies that might be necessary to help you automate all the various different elements of your program. So it's not for the lighthearted. Moving into things like purpose, collection, and consent, I mentioned earlier, consent around the use of an individual's data is something that you have to have and maintain. But when you think about how businesses change and how the nature of how you may use data can change, you have to keep those consents up to date. So as the use case for those data assets evolves within your organization, you have to reestablish consent from that individual that provisioned their data to you for that business purpose. That also then starts to bleed into the concept of data subject requests, or DSARs is the term that you would typically hear within the industry. And really what that is that individual exercising their right over their data through a number of different actions that the law stipulates that they can take. Things like the right of erasure or portability of the data or correction of the data are common kinds of elements for a data subject request. And you can see that in a practical element of, one of your customers or ex-customers sends you an email triggering a DSAR process, which stipulates that you need to delete their data upon that request. So those are the kinds of things that you have to manage within the spectrum of a privacy program moving forward from September of this year when dealing with residents of the Quebec marketplace. And of course, keep in mind when Bill C-27 is enacted at some point in our near future, we will have to do that at a national level within the country. Moving on to a poll question. So taking what I just said into consideration, we're curious to hear from the folks in the audience how far your organization has progressed with clients. Is this a new topic that you're just beginning to educate yourself on and move down the path on? Have you already started the program? Are you almost there, just a hair away from having everything ready to go? Or do you expect to have everything ready to go by September 22nd? So hopefully the poll system works and we will see the results of that activity. Outstanding. So the fact that the majority of the audience is right in that middle is what we would expect to see when we have a law like Law 25 being enacted. But one of the real notable pieces of the puzzle is that these things or the systems and the way that you have to put in place all the different processes and so on in your organization to comply isn't done overnight. So it's a journey. And we'll talk about that when you start to see the demonstration of some of the technology and what we're doing to help customers along that particular journey. Diving into some of the common challenges that we've experienced helping customers implement privacy programs. And a lot of this is centered around the concept that the growth of data has been a challenge. But it's not just data in structured systems. It's data within documents, email systems. It's unstructured data that might be in an area of the organization that we would consider to be dark data. Don't really understand what's in there, but we know there's a lot of it. And those are areas of significant risk that have to be taken into consideration when putting in place a privacy program. Obviously, third-party systems is a big piece of the puzzle. So you've outsourced X function to a company's SaaS environment. That data that's in that third-party system is your responsibility and needs to be governed based on the exposure to various different laws, regulations, and policies that you might be adhering to within your organization, adding to the complexity. And then, of course, you have data incidences and the growth of that. And based on the role that Data Sentinel plays in our marketplace, we get to see a lot of data incidences, to the point where when I'm talking to my family about what we do and I'm shaking my head going, I cannot believe there are so many. And we only see a small percentage of those incidences in the Canadian marketplace, but we're seeing them weekly within our organization, and we're helping companies deal with the outcome of those particular incidences. But the one that's most common that we hear the most is that organizations have limited time, limited skills relative to implementing governance and privacy programs, and limited budget to do so in a timely fashion. So the solution that we're bringing to the market is going to help organizations obviously be able to deal with those kinds of challenges. So we'd love to hear from you yet again, and get an understanding of the kinds of challenges that you're seeing in your organization relative to putting in place a privacy program or a governance program that's going to support your privacy program. Is it lack of time? IT team being fully booked and available to support you in a timely fashion? Resources obviously being somewhat limited because, of course, we all are operating under tighter budgets as we see in the economic situation that we're in. And of course, an overwhelming amount of data, especially the data holdings that are maybe in those dark data systems where we don't necessarily know what's actually in the data, and or all the above. Perfect. All the above is a fairly common type of challenge, and I think that's exactly what I would have expected to see as we were going through this process. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back to our next presenter.
Thanks, Mark. So what I'd like to do now is just give you some background about who we are and why we got together. Denodo is a worldwide software company. We're based in Palo Alto. We have operations around the world. Gartner and Forrester leader, award-winning data integration and data management platform. Because of this, we were heavily involved in a number of organizations, GDPR pursuits. We're very, very active in the province of Quebec. And we independently, for a long time, have been developing our solutions for Law 25 compliance. We work closely with a local Canadian integrator, Copperstone Connect, and Copperstone is also a strong partner of Data Sentinel. And after talking to both of us, said, you know, you guys really need to get together because together you do, individually you do great things, but together you seem to have this fully put together. Data Sentinel is a more recent, proudly Canadian company located just north of Toronto. They've developed an award-winning data trust and compliance platform. They have a proprietary deep learning discovery technology that enables them to monitor, measure, and remediate data. And they really can help ensure compliance within an organization. So we started working together. Denodo has a strong Canadian team, and our Canadian tech team and the Data Sentinel team actually found that the technologies intertwine and integrate very easily. So we've completed that integration work and think we have a very unique strategy when it comes to Law 25 compliance. One of the things that we identified up front, you know, is that this can be an overwhelming task. There is so much data and there is so little time. And the way in which you, I guess, combat those two things is two things. One, you have a proven process, a methodology that gets you from I don't know how to start right the way through to finish, and substantial automation, which is what takes time out of the equation, because so much of this we have found ways of being able to automate. So let's take a look at what the joint solution looks like. There's a lot of key capabilities I've got listed on the right-hand side here. Possibly the most important is the first. Denodo has a capability of talking to literally hundreds of systems, and Data Sentinel is able to use that capability to scan and work across all of these different systems, in addition to their own very powerful capabilities for working with unstructured data. So PDFs and Word documents and files on your file system, which may contain emails or confidential information, and you have no clue of that. So between the two technologies, we literally support your entire enterprise organization and not just a little piece. And you'd be surprised when you survey the marketplace how many compliance solutions are restricted to the cloud or restricted to a certain subset of your systems. And that's good, but it's not great because you need to talk to everything. Once we've connected to everything, that's when automation really comes in. And the Data Sentinel product, which I'll show you, has the ability to work through your systems, classify the information in them, and understand with you what sensitive, restricted, confidential information you have, where it is, and perhaps most importantly, associate a risk score with your entire systems portfolio so that you can see right now where you stand, and over time as you remediate, you can track your progress. So obviously monitoring any project is key to its success, and we have those capabilities. Now, a critical thing is to make sure that confidential information is controlled. You're going to have it, but who is allowed to see it? And between us, we can take the information that has been identified by Data Sentinel, and we can apply powerful security policies to that secure that data across the organization and limit the access to well-defined people who with centralized policies governing. And then finally, compliance is one thing, but compliance is sometimes the opposite side or maybe the antagonist of getting things done in the organization. And while we put this very secure framework in place, we're actually enabling end users to have more free access to data and to be able to monetize, use, and profit from the data in your organization more. We just control carefully who sees what from a central place and can change those rules and adapt them as we need to. Beyond this, something that we won't be featuring as much today, but we have the ability to generate the information for all of the critical reporting that is a key part of the Law 25 compliance standard. Now, today, we wanted to give you a look at what the technology looks like working and to solve a particular scenario. Between the combined capabilities here, there's a lot more that we could do, but we're sort of restricted by our hour-long format. So what we're going to do today is look at this problem of protecting information of the type that could lead to an identity theft of the sort that HN's mother unfortunately experienced last month. So in our example scenario here, we've got production data available to our internal staffing, for instance. And this is a Power BI report. And we'll see that we have a birthday, a birth month, a birth country, an email address. So we know your exact name, we know your email address, we know your country of birth, and we know a lot of other things about you. That can go a long way towards constituting the basis for identity theft. And this is information that could be sold for lots of money. So what we want to have happen is under control, that if someone is looking at that information internally, it gets masked or limited to what they need to know. So in this case, there is no birth information, an email address is truncated. So we sort of got a name and nothing else. So what we're going to do is really go through this process. And it's a 4-step process towards governing unprotected, personally identifiable information. So it all starts with doing a data assessment, to understanding where we are in the organization. And to start with, we establish a data policy framework, and that is uncover via process the information that is deemed sensitive for your company and that's under your purview. And that can change for different organizations. You know, an airline will have passport information on file. That may be something that a different organization does not. Just to give you a simple example. Once we've identified with you a set of attributes to look for in your data, that's when the automation comes in. And we run automated classification. It goes through your data, it classifies the data, it identifies areas of key concern, and it establishes that risk score. So we'll show you that in just a second. Once we've done that, we have now a very good understanding of where we've got problems, and now it's time to remediate. And we do that by taking that information with the Denodo platform and developing no-code data policies that cross all of your systems and will enable things like email to be associated with consistent rules which are uniform across your entire organization. And we'll document those through our data catalog. And then the final bit of the policy enforcement is essentially just is connecting to that Denodo system, and everything that does will have consistent policies attached to it. So that's a quick run through of the steps we're about to show you. I am going to pass things over to Data Sentinel's Mike Roberts, and Mike's going to take us through the first 2 steps. Over to you, Mike.
All right. Thank you, Robert. So when we start a data assessment, we begin by looking at defining a framework that a client can work with. So this one that you're seeing here is loosely based on GDPR. Some clients will already have a framework and others will have a more complex framework. But generally, you can think of data as being public, internal, confidential, and restricted. So we'll work with the company to understand what are the categories that they need to categorize their data and to be compliant. You can think of public data as things that can be exposed to the public with no risk, so website content, through to restricted data, which would be your most sensitive information, contracts, or maybe investment information. So in a typical project, what we would do is go through and find out what types of data a particular company has. So an example here, they have marketing materials, web content, public information, press releases, but they also have organizational charts and guidelines and procedures, which are not intended for public release. And then moving from left to right, we then have confidential information, things like client records or customer records. And finally, their most restricted elements, which if disclosed would subject them to fines or reputational risks. So this could be health information, financial details, credit card information, and the like. So the first step is to go through and come up with a framework, and then categorize the types of data that the company has in the framework that we've agreed upon. The second thing, and the reason we built the framework, is to enable automated classification. So to start this process, we'll take a look at the different types of classifiers that Data Sentinel has built into it. So we have AI-based classifiers that can look for things like people or addresses or other types of elements for which there can't be a list. We have pattern-based classifiers for things like credit cards or health cards or other regular types of numbers that we can detect in a system. And finally, we have dictionary-based categories too, which is where we can really customize our classification engine to find the types of data that a particular client is seeking. So if they're the insurance business, we can build out more refined tags and classifications related to insurance. If they're a manufacturer or a municipal government, we can modify the tags appropriately. And once this is done, we'll go through and look at the different data sources that the client has, and make sure that we have a list of the required classifications that they're going to need to be compliant in the future. And as part of this, we'll look at any special characteristics of a classification. For example, is it PII? Is it credit payment card information, or is it health information? And record those as well. So when we're finished this process, and these are just examples, we'll have something like this, a list of the types of classifications that a particular company wants to look for. So we could be looking for things like files, phone numbers, URLs, addresses. It could be things related to employment changes, audits, or legal action. But again, this is an example list that we are showing for the purpose of this webinar. But these would be customized to the particular client, so they can find the data they need, and then these can be used to summarize data or exchange this information with Denodo. So I'm going to log into a Data Sentinel system. And kind of walk through this this process. So log into it. And we'll take a look at it from sort of the connectors first. So when we start a project, what we'll do is go through and define the sources that are to be scanned. So in this particular example, we have Azure SQL Server, we may have a data warehouse, we could have Salesforce, we could also have unstructured data assets, for example, SharePoint or OneDrive. Exchange are very common. And we'll go through and connect each one of these to extract metadata about the information, describe what's there, and then also the sensitive data categories that align with the framework that the clients have defined. And once this process has completed, we can then get a high-level view of the information that has been captured. So if we go and take a look at a particular system or all of our systems, we'll get a number of objects that have been scanned, and then based on the choices that the client has made, we'll be able to see the identity metrics, files, other human resources, or just take a more of a policy-based view of the information, look at the restricted components, for in this example, social security numbers or bank accounts that have been found in the system. So we can get a summary view of the risk associated with a particular system, as well as a more specific view, for example, looking at all of the identity classifications that were found. Here we found people, certain kinds of government identifiers. If I look at my contact details, you can see we have phone numbers, emails, street addresses. So it gives an understanding of what's in a particular system and also if there are any surprises in it. So for systems that, particularly those that can allow entry of notes, Sometimes there can be surprises hiding in those free-form text fields. Or we can look at the data by sensitivity. Again, looking at my restricted elements, I'm getting a sense of what's in a particular data source. I can certainly drill through to a particular slice of the data to see what is available in terms of classification. So I'm going to run a report here. And these tags and classifications that are going to be shown can be exchanged with other systems. So we would find, for example, that a particular database or a set of files may contain credit card information or social security numbers. And then this information can be exchanged with Denodo, or can be exchanged with a privacy officer or people that take care of a particular system. So they're aware of what's contained on that particular platform. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Etienne, who'll show you how these classifications can be imported into Denodo and be used to secure access to the data as well.
Thank you, Mike. So I will continue the presentation. So we're going to look at now the concept, the two last steps of the journey that Robert just described. So once you understood your data, the next step is to define those policies in the operational enforcement solution that I'm going to talk about, which is Denodo. And the end goal of this is to ensure that data is secured and protected against anyone that has access to the data. So we're not trying to protect data to hackers or external people. It's really within the company when people do analytics, or if it's machine-to-machine integration, right? Everybody has access to data. You want to make sure that they have the right level of access that they need to do their work properly. So the first thing I wanted to share is the work that we're doing with Denodo here. So Denodo is a data management platform. I assume everybody can see my screen. So Denodo's data management platform. And what we do is we simplify access to data for all the different kind of end users within the company. So as an example, you could have business managers that use Power BI, right, or Tableau to work with reports and KPIs. On the other end of the spectrum, you have data scientist people that are really interested in that golden nugget of the data, like pure raw data. They want to find something nobody else has found. Everybody on this call here relate to the privacy office of their organization, right? So how do we enforce governance policies and workflows to ensure we have good quality and properly governed data? There could be application developers, right, that don't understand what is the data, what's a customer, what's an asset, what's a building. All that they want is a data service that they can use into their applications. And then, you know, also you have IT that's in charge of ensuring that everybody can do their job in the best possible manner. So what we do at Denodo is yes?
We are getting some messages that people can't see your screen.
I was afraid that would be the case. Can we try this here? Hold on. Trying to push the screen to the audience. Can you see the screen now?
No, we cannot see it yet.
Okay. Hold on. Those things happen. So what if I... Robert, can you take back control and share the deck with the audience by any chance? Let's see what happens.
I've just changed the screen. Just confirming, Katarina says she now sees it.
Okay, so you see the data management platform, I assume. Then we'll go with that. So as I was just saying, and sorry for the interruption, is that Denodo acts as the single data access to all the data sources. And there was a time when people needed to put everything into data lakes or data warehouses in order to leverage the data. That time has changed. What Denodo offers now is the ability to access all the data in where it lives in real time. So that's what we call a virtual data management platform. And the way this is done, it's really it's simply through a data catalog, and I'll show that to you in just a few minutes. But think of it as you're I don't know, shopping at Best Buy as an example, and you're browsing their catalog for computers or screens. Instead, the end users are browsing for data products. And those data products are virtual representations of what lives in the operational data systems. So as we can see on the screen here, a base level data product could be the list of stores or clients, maybe the sales transactions. And from there, very easily with no code, it's possible to, using drag and drop features, assemble new, more sophisticated data products. So as we can see on the screen, maybe, for instance, the annual sales per country per store. And what's nice about this is that typical KPI would usually be done by someone in Power BI, but now because it lives in the data management platform, it becomes available to all the data consumers. So you ensure consistency between business managers, as an example, but also with maybe a new employee that's not familiar with the business concepts or a data scientist. So now let's see how we're going to leverage this technology to enforce the privacy policies defined by Data Sentinel. So how we're going to do this, the idea is that this is an example of a Power BI screen that Robert showed earlier. We see that data is protected. Obviously, we want to enforce those policies across all data consuming channels. So it could be for Power BI, it could be if someone uses a notebook with Python as an example, or maybe someone that's building a mobile application. If the data used by those consuming applications come from multiple data sources, it could be Azure on the cloud, it could be Oracle on-premise, it could be DB2 as an example. It can be very challenging to enforce policies across all the different kind of data consumers and all the different data sources. So the way we do this is we put Denodo as the data access layer, and we're going, and I'm going to show this to you live, import the data policies through our pre-built connectors. We'll import the data policies from Data Sentinel and at once secure access to all the data sources for all the sensitive information. This means that the data stewards don't need to wait for IT for their technical skills and the need to go in every single underlying data source. They can do everything that they need with no coding at once in Denodo. So before I go to the live product, I just wanted to remind everyone what it is that we're talking about. So what lives in Data Sentinel's database is really something that looks like this, right? You have fields and databases, and the level of sensitivity, is it personal information? Is it healthcare? Is it financial data? And then what's the policy that has to be applied? Is it confidential information, restricted, internal, and so on? So this will serve as the basis for the creation of the privacy policies that will help enforce those policies for the end users. So now let me go into our product. And I'm going to start by going, I assume everybody can see my screen. I'm going to start by going into our data catalog here, which is what the end users would work with as they explore and discover the data products they would use on a day-to-day basis. So as I mentioned, think of it as a Best Buy data catalog, but instead you have data products. My screen might be a bit hard to read, so I'll use the zoom feature here. As you can see, we have different elements. So this is the welcome page of the data catalog. You see recommendations that our AI engine can make to the end users if someone's working with customer data, as an example. Well, if there's a new customer related data product, it will be recommended to that end user. There's also collaboration features to enable people to recommend to each other data products. The goal here is to increase the data literacy rate, which means enable people to know what data is available to them so that they can use more data and in the end take better decisions. This is done by different features. As an example, users can navigate data product by organizations. So it's just one example, but I could be looking for marketing data products or finance data products. And the catalog will help me get to those data products and understand what's available to me. So now I'm logged as the administrator. In theory, I have right to everything. So I'll open a data product. Data product is a bit boring. It's really a set of rows and columns, right? But let's have a look at the data at it. So what's nice about the Denodo data catalog is you can have a look at the data to ensure that it's really what you need for your work before you import it or start using it in Power BI as an example. So I'll do a simple query. I don't need to know SQL. I don't need to do any coding. All I do is define the fields that I'm looking for, and I'll execute my report here. And what this is giving me is the list of all my customers. But there's a problem. As you can see here, and as Robert pointed out, I can see the email. I can even see the credit card number, the PIN, the CVV, their balance, the phone number. This is exactly what we don't want to have. And unfortunately, maybe not the credit card number, that's all protected, but there's a lot of sensitive information that is currently available to a lot of people in many, many companies. So how can we fix that problem? Where I'm going to show you how we will import the policies from Data Sentinel and create them into Denodo. So let's go in our data studio. This is where the data architects would work. And what we see here, again, I'll zoom, is we've connected to Data Sentinel's database. So we've created a data product, Denodo, that represents what we just saw earlier. So we have the fields, we have the type of information, is it personal or health information? And then what's the policy? Is it confidential? Is it restricted? And so on. This will serve as the basis for the process of creating the policies. So the first step is to import those into what we call tags that are used to create global policies. So I'll run our pre-built import module. It connects to Data Sentinel. And in real time, I'm getting a list of classifications and policies. So in this case, let's say I want to secure the email address, right? The other ones are covered. I'll show that. But for now, I want to secure the email address. So that's nice. I just imported an email tag for Data Sentinel. It's in green. It means it's new. The ones in red means they're already there. So I can manage the deltas, understand what's changing, and accept or reject some changes. So I'll just accept the changes here. And this is going to import all the tags from Data Sentinel into Denodo. So as you can see, I now have an email tag here. I have others, right? So previously I imported credit card information, phone number, street address, and all of this. But now today, in just a few mouse clicks, I connected to Data Sentinel and imported the email tag. From there, I'll create a data governance policy. So we are going to go here. And you see, this is my list of global security policies. I already have some for the credit card, for the phone number, and the authentication email. I'll create a new one for my email fields. So I'll call it Law 25 email policy. And this screen here, as simple as it might look, is extremely powerful because it enables, that's what I was saying earlier, it enables non-technical people, data stewards, to create a very sophisticated policies. So you can use roles, you can create policy-based policies or attribute-based policies. So as an example, in this case, I'll say this policy is going to apply to Paul and the Power BI developers because they shouldn't see the email addresses. And then the attribute user session, that's to do, if you're familiar with this, attribute-based access control. So based on the user session, where they are, their IP address, or anything that comes from an LDAP, I could use that to define the access privileges. This will apply to my data products, my views that are tagged with email. And we'll apply some restrictions. So we want to mask the columns that are tagged as email. So I'll just say email here. And now I could say, okay, for email, I will only show the first 4 characters. I could have custom rules. I can use anonymization algorithms, tokenization, encryption. I can use third-party software, a lot of capabilities here. But for the purpose of this demo, to do a simple
is there a possibility you could make the screen fonts a little larger? They're a bit hard to read.
Thank you for reminding me. So as we can see here, I selected the ability to show the first 4 characters of the email address. That's all I needed to do. So in just, again, a few minutes, in 1 minute, I created a policy. I could have added many more tags, obviously. It could have been the credit card information, the phone number. So I don't need to create policies for everything. That really helps from a scalability perspective. In one screen, I can manage different roles, different users, different databases, and different policies. So I don't need to do this 1,000 times. So we'll save this, and we've just created our policy. So let's go back to our data catalog. And this time, I'm going to log in as Paul. I know it might be a bit small to read. So this is our login page. I will log in as Paul. And I will execute the same query. As Paul, I have access to my customer account information. So I'll just say, please show me the fields of that table, this data product, and I'll execute. And now, as we can see, with no surprise, everybody saw where I was going with this. My email address is now indeed masked. And because I'm Paul and I had those other privacy policies enforced, my phone number is masked, my credit card information, my PIN, my CVV is also masked. So the point that I wanted to make here is that we, again, with no code in a very, very easy way, we're able to enforce those privacy policies over data that could come from tens or even hundreds of data sources. It doesn't matter. You don't need to understand the security model of DB2, Oracle, Azure, and so forth. Now, what I see in Denodo is obviously what I see elsewhere, right? So if I go, as an example, into Power BI, so I know this is a bit small, but into Power BI, here you see the same thing. My email address has been masked. And I had another rule that says you're only allowed to see people that work from Canada, that are in Canada because you work from Canada. So I'm able to enforce what we call geofencing, so that only the right people have access to the data that they're supposed to be working with. Power BI is one way of consuming data. I mentioned there are other types of data consumers. So I could be looking at the data through a web service if you're a bit more technical. If you do, as an example, a mobile application website, like a transactional website or anything like this. So this is the same web service. And it doesn't matter whether it's a web service, Power BI, Python, SAS, anything else. The data is now secured for all the consuming channels. So we, in just a few minutes, were able to import the data policies and enforce them across all the databases, underlying data sources for all the data consumers. One last thing before I conclude this demo is that I was able to import the data for all the databases that are connected to Denodo, right? When Denodo acts as the unified access point to all these data sources. I'm able also to see what policies from Data Sentinel were not protected. So as an example, excuse me, I'm just running into a small issue. So I was able to basically extract with this list here. It might be small. Again, I'll zoom in, but basically get all the databases, the data fields and views that were not covered by Denodo. So as a data privacy officer, this enables me to set this aside and start working on a separate plan to secure those data. So I can do most of the work through Denodo, but for the other data sources, I have the list of what remains to be protected. With that said, this is what I wanted to share. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you, Etienne. So we're approaching the wrap-up time, everyone. And just as a summary, first of all, just to harken back to the start of the presentation, we've reached a stage where information privacy has become a human right. We have the right to make sure that the information which we share in a digital age is essentially not used against us. And it's an important thing. Law 25, as we've said, with C27 is just the start of Canadian legislations to which we must adhere. And it's a huge challenge because of the large amount of personal information that we control, in the vast resources of data that we carry in a large enterprise. Because of the size and the scope of this, automation is the only practical approach to understanding where we've got a problem, to prioritizing that solution, and to taking action. And Denodo and Data Sentinel are bringing a proven approach and that advanced automation to this process. I think what we'd like you to take away is that with the combination of our solutions, compliance is manageable and achievable. And it's something that it's probably time for a lot of organizations to really sink their teeth into. I'm going to pass things over to Mark to talk a little bit about some next steps.
Thank you, Robert. So typically the question we get asked is, how do we start? And the answer that we usually apply is depends on where you are in the journey of your particular privacy program or governance program. The implementation of both very often is done in parallel. And we usually start with with something we call an assessment, a data assessment, or in the industry, we call it automated data mapping, where we leverage the technologies that we're bringing into the marketplace to discover all of the sensitive data that exists within an organization, do all that classification work, and then ultimately feed all that into Denodo as part of that overall process, along with what we're doing for our privacy program, specifically just with the Data Sentinel technology. That data mapping activity is typically prioritized. And what I mean by that is we usually start with systems that we would consider to be high risk. And 9 times out of 10, that tends to be a lot of unstructured data sources. And one of the questions that I think came up in the Q&A tab was, where do you typically see the majority of data incidences? And unfortunately, it tends to be in unstructured source systems or systems that might be holding documents. Even one of our customers has had a breach within their email systems. And of course, then the challenge is what's in those data assets. So unstructured data typically is one of the key areas where we begin the mapping process. But at the end of the day, the objective is to map the entire sensitive data portfolio across the organization as that initial step in implementing your privacy program. So with all that being said, please feel free to reach out. If we don't have time, and I don't think we will have time to answer all the questions in the Q&A because there are quite a few, we'd be happy to schedule one-on-one discussions with anybody who's interested to sit down and talk about your program and how our solution might be able to fit within it. Robert, back to you, sir.
Thank you, Mark. Listen, there's been a ton of questions come in for us today. We would like to try to address at least a few of those. I'll just, marketing has asked us to put in a commercial. Denodo's North American User Group, DataFest, is happening September 12th through 14th. If you want to go in person, Boston, Massachusetts is the place, and some of the sessions will also be available virtually. We will be having a special session with Data Sentinel on actionable data classifications. So the story will continue there. But right now, let's take a few questions, just a couple questions quickly. And sorry, just go back here. And if we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you directly to answer those. We've kind of got names beside questions. So just going back a little bit here, let's see. First of all, we have saved a recording of this presentation, which we will be distributing. So everybody will get access to a link after the presentation. Let's see. Had a question, how is Data Sentinel positioned compared to Microsoft Purview? Are the functionalities complementary or is it an alternative solution to Purview? Mark, I'll hand that to you.
Thank you. Good question. And the answer is a bit of both, depending on how you're implementing your technology. There are elements that overlap. We also integrate with Purview and have a number of client situations where that is the case, where we're focused on, obviously, the sensitive data management privacy use cases specific to all data across all systems, no matter where they are. So they can be physically deployed on cloud, hybrid cloud, on-prem, etc. We have the ability to be able to do what we do from a compliance perspective specific to all those systems. And oftentimes we are asked to integrate into various different kinds of data catalogs that may exist in the client environment for different business use case purposes. And Purview is sometimes one of those target systems that we integrate with. But the use cases do overlap to a certain degree, but ultimately we're focused on that sensitive data management use case.
Great, thank you, Mark. We just really have time for probably one more question. Amir had a couple, and Chen, I'll direct these towards you. His first question was, can the policy include the purpose for accessing data? Actually, I might take that myself. Amir, there's a couple things about that, because so first of all, there is documentation fields available in the policy, and typically in a longer version of the demo that would get filled out, where we'd explain what the policy was and what its intent would be. However, the policy is really governing who can use the data. Our data catalog and allows us to be able to see who has used the data. Denodo has the ability to actually allow you to audit so that anybody can understand who has seen what data and when. And also the data catalog is where we typically document where that data, the usage patterns for that data would be. And an end user would typically come into the data catalog as their way of selecting and deciding to use information. The policy definition is more for specifically for the data governance team to be able to develop a low-code, no-code policy, if that makes sense. We had some other really good questions here. I think we're going to cut things off and just address them with people directly. And we'll talk to the team. We might actually try to do a little bit of a Q&A for everyone then. So Heather, I'm going to just maybe pass things off to you to conclude.
Yes, thank you so much, Robert. And thank you to all of our speakers for the great presentation and demo. For the audience, as Robert mentioned, there are a lot of questions, so we will make sure to get back to you really quickly there. And also, there are a few great resources. So before we conclude, if you want to download those from the attachments tab, we will include them in the email that's going to be sent out as well, the follow-up email. But there's a solution brief, leveraging data virtualization to protect data privacy, that covers solution PIPEDA, 25 compliance, and then also a Canadian privacy laws readiness checklist, companies' readiness for compliance. And as Robert mentioned, Denodo Data Fest, this is our upcoming in-person user conference, September 12th through the 14th in Boston. And Data Sentinel will be participating in a session focused on regulations and compliance. So it's a great way to connect with the team, as well as you can network with other customers and partners. So we have a link for more information in the attachments tab. Thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much to everybody.